after doing a month dedicated to the show in July, along with doing a 4-hour fanfic reading, which, just to point this out, that isn't going to be the only fanfic reading I'm going to be doing involving the show, I feel like tackling the most infamous episode from the show is way more accurate because Professor Lampwick is an episode that I had in mind on whether I want to review it for this month or for a later time. But let me just get this out of the way so that way I don't have to talk about this episode ever again. If you recall my review of Hurricane Hall that I've uploaded last year, I've mentioned this character briefly, mostly because back then I didn't watch all the episodes and I only watched 3. It's mostly on me since that most of the dislikes are catered to my misinformation involving characters like Professor Lampwick. Let me just say this right now that his character, I can easily understand what they're trying to do with him, but considering that he's going against Chloe, who is still a child who is attending college, I am convinced that he's a much more menacing threat compared to Agent Trout from the movie. Let me just say this right now, his presence in this episode doesn't really bother me that much, but at the same time, the fact that he's manipulating the bears along with Chloe despite the fact that the bears kidnapped him doesn't make everything okay. Granted, it's mostly the bears' fault for kidnapping Lampwick in order to have Chloe have a personal talk with Lampwick, but do you really think that it's gonna be acceptable to see how he acts towards other characters? The main goal of Chloe's situation is the fact that she's been pressured. The class that she was in was chemical class, which is a way more difficult class, and I didn't even take chemical classes. And for someone who completely sees so many of this from Jimmy Neutron along with other cartoons, I can easily get a resemblance of what Chloe is feeling. And the fact that she's being pressured by Lampwick after she messes up, this really proves to me that she was mostly in the wrong. It's one thing to have a terrifying teacher look straight in the eye at you, but having Lampwick right behind Chloe while she's being pressured isn't really a good thing whatsoever. If Lampwick was in front of everyone in the other side of the classroom while Chloe looks straight in his eyes and see how terrifying it is, then maybe I can easily understand that she is dealing with so much stress by doing everything completely right on her assignment. Even if his betrayal as the episode continues gets a lot more worse, I can still say that giving him an introduction like that would give Chloe much motivation, but apparently the worst has yet to come. The bears in this episode, even though that they kidnapped Lampwick, which was way too far even for them, but even if they had a normal conversation with Lampwick, it won't change a difference because Lampwick will probably still be a lot more selfish for how he acts towards other characters. Lampwick completely told Panda that he will be grounded forever, not to mention that he won't be able to have his phone or anything. Do you really think that any other person in San Francisco will be able to be that manipulative towards the bears in this scenario? I'm pretty sure that Num Num, despite being way more famous, wouldn't do anything of what Professor Lampwick does in this episode. And if anyone's going to bring up Panda's behavior in this episode, I'm just gonna say this right now, this is not like in Panda's date where he's way over his head, because he didn't know what he was doing. He stalked Professor Lampwick, and the fact that he completely tries to untie him by releasing him from not getting arrested, but it doesn't even change to the fact that Professor Lampwick even stated that he wants all the bears locked up for life, which means he wants all the bears to be dead. Can we just all agree that Agent Trout is mostly behind all this and Professor Lampwick is actually working with Agent Trout despite him not knowing much about the bears upon meeting them for the first time? Because by the looks of this episode, it really feels more like it. you have no idea how these quotes really affect much of this episode compared to other bad episodes. Say all you want, but this is beyond over the limit, to the point that I can't even think that any other episodes from this show can get worse than that quote alone. And when I say that quote, I mean that the lines of dialogue in those terrible episodes, because to give those episodes credit, the dialogue in those episodes didn't have anything to do with bears dying whatsoever. And I'm pretty sure that in the We Bare Bears movie, despite the animal abuse, they don't mention death whatsoever, and it's mostly the bears being sent to different countries. And to be quite honest, there's really nothing to talk about in this episode. Unlike in other episodes I reviewed as part of Cartoon Crisis 2 last year, I at least have something interesting to talk about, especially Num Num, but in this episode, it's really, really bland. It's mostly Professor Lampwick manipulating the other characters, which he is mostly talented at, but it doesn't really do much other than just having the characters just go against each other for the sake of adding the runtime of this episode. And the fact that Chloe just wants to have a normal conversation with Lampwick is literally all of what's needed. And the fact that Lampwick is just doing everything in order to prove himself that he wants Chloe to succeed by not being into too much pressure, then it would have been more accurate if you told her that in the beginning of the episode. Seriously. If you really think that being under pressure while completely just trying to do a science project is what Chloe needs to learn after all this time, is really not a good way to settle it. If you're going to have a character like this, the least you can do is probably give him an understanding of what the other characters are doing, because aside from Agent Childs being an actual antagonist, Professor Lampwick isn't really an antagonist other than just being terrifying towards other characters. Yes, I did mention that he is somewhat of an antagonist when it comes to him being a lot more menacing, but the fact that his motivations is just having Chloe not be under pressure by doing her science assignment just really proves to me that they just didn't know what to do with Professor Lampwick after this episode. And the fact that he returns in Hurricane Hall as the third season continues, I'm going to assume that they're trying to make it up to people by giving him some likability by being the narrator in that episode, but no matter how great Hurricane Hall is, I can't get over the fact of how Professor Lampwick is portrayed in this episode, because it's difficult to see his motivations while all he does is manipulating the bears and Chloe just so that he can actually have Chloe focus on her science assignment. So quite frankly, this is way worse than Num Num and Panda's Date. At least in those episodes, I can easily sit through them to understand of how the characters are portrayed, but in this episode, they just took it way too far. It's hard to find a terrible episode, especially a show this harmless, but when you completely make the episode something completely extraordinary by having the elements from the show take place in that episode, it's actually somewhat of an accomplishment. Let me just say this right now, after watching terrible episodes in the past, they don't do any of the stuff of what this episode does. I know some of you guys are going to request me on reviewing other We Bare Bears episodes that are considered terrible, but just to let you know, I've already tackled the worst episode. So you can say that this is worse than Num Num and Panda's Day all you want, but every time I completely look at this episode, and every time it just gets a lot more complicated for me to understand, that really proves to me that any of the characters in this show aren't really sane when they're paired with other characters like Professor Lampwick and Num Num. But after doing Weird Bear Bears month, I'm pretty sure I've addressed everything that needs to be addressed, even if I didn't tackle all the episodes. like I said, I'm still going to be making more reviews centering around the show, and I'm going to be reviewing Charlie's Halloween Theme 2 next month. But as for this episode, it gets a 2.5 out of 10. All in all, hopefully, I don't have to deal with Professor Lampwick ever again.
Let's get this started again. Me and my whole